Hi there, Dr. Kahn again, here to do your weekly parent webinar. Today's topic is around understanding anxiety during COVID-19. One of the most important things for us to understand at this time is that so much of what we're experiencing is driven by anxiety and physical discomfort in our kids. I'm not talking about anxiety necessarily as your child having some diagnosed condition, but more about anxiety as it relates to stress and feeling their body being wound up. When we think about the idea of stress and anxiety, it's important to understand that stress is a normal process within the body. Stress is what allows us to maintain tension in our muscles, what makes it so we don't fall down and become floppy on the floor. The idea that stress can drive our body to be more energized and more motivated is something that you see when you're in a situation that isn't terribly anxiety provoking, but it's a little bit energizing. And you might find that you think more sharply, you're more alert and more able to engage in day-to-day tasks. The other side of anxiety is that our body responds to things that are dangerous in a way that's designed to protect us. That protective drive is built into our hindbrain, the automatic part of our brain that makes us quite similar to other animals. In that, obviously, as a human animal, our job is to survive, is to live. And when we're exposed to stressful situations, our body goes into a mode that is designed to protect us from things that are dangerous or that would hurt us. When we think about a change in the tension of our body, a little bit of stress is a good thing. It gives us some motivation. A lot of stress is a negative thing. It takes away our body's ability to think and process information. And in those situations, what we see is a child who has, good intelligence, good ability to do things, slowly start to lose their ability because of how their body is functioning with regard to stress and anxiety. When we think about some of the things that happen as a result of stress, it can impair our thinking. It can stop us from thinking clearly. It can also affect behavior. Children may show angry, irritable, fearful behavior that gets in the way of them doing day-to-day activities. Sometimes it's hard to know the difference between some of what we see in that naughty behavior versus just being avoidant because they're trying to protect themselves or escape from something they're afraid of. Obviously, the withdrawal and avoidance part of things really comes into play a lot when you're in school or when you're trying to learn from home. One of the things we have to understand is that because of our brain's survival instinct, the automatic physical response that we have when we are stressed, it can be something that can run out of control in some of our kids. Children who have diagnosable anxiety tend to be much more responsive to things in their environment. So a loud noise, a change in daily life situation, a change in environment can raise their stress levels quite a bit. And in doing so, we see that they are sort of more apt to absorb things going on around them. That sensitivity makes them overreact. In some ways, it's the body's way of protecting itself. Those kids, if they were out in the wild, 300 years ago, might have actually been better able to survive in their environments because they might have heard something that was dangerous off in the distance before someone else did. But sitting at your living room or at your kitchen table or in their classrooms, this sensitivity level often leads to impairment and challenges in their daily functioning. When we think about the idea of fight or flight is that automatic response of our body to protect it from something that is dangerous. It takes our brain and says, just do the things most necessary for survival. And that really can be a barrier if you're not in a situation that's actually dangerous with regard to life and death. What we learn and how we access the information about what we learn and what we know how to do is significantly affected by things like fight or flight or anxiety in the day-to-day. Let's think about the brain in terms of an analogy here. Our brain can function much in the same way as an accordion does. An accordion, is an instrument that has oxygen that is pressed in and out of, that helps make music. It propels air and makes different sounds. If we think of our brain in its calm state as an open accordion, there is a range of information that we can access because we are relaxed and calm. In our most calm, relaxed state, we can think of things we've learned before, remember a phone number, remember certain things that are important to us. The idea that it gives us full open access. When we think about the alternative to this, when the accordion is closed, what happens is the access to what we have in our brain is reduced. So when you go into fight or flight and the brain shrinks down into its most compressed mode, what we have in this small space are physical automatic responses to escape, to fight, to scream, in some cases to collapse, cry, and disengage. But we have to think about it in terms of when we're stressed, the accordion brain stops us from being able to access information that wouldn't be helpful in a time of crisis. And that makes sense in terms of the survival of the animal. It doesn't help in the survival of a student who's trying to achieve, who's trying to take a test. So when you think about testing anxiety, maybe think about for yourselves. When you were taking a test and maybe the first two questions are unfamiliar or things that confuse you, the accordion brain starts to slowly close on you. And as that occurs, your ability to remember things that you clearly knew maybe 20 minutes ago starts to fall away and starts to become more challenged. The idea that we are the only animals who have the ability to think and plan and actually stop the automatic response of our brain is a very powerful thing. Interestingly, if those of us who suffer from anxiety and who are challenged by that functionally have to learn that concrete strategy, have to learn the artificial ways to stop the body from protecting itself when it's not actually in danger. And that's something that's really challenging. It's one of the reasons we do group training on relaxation and coping strategies. It's one of the reasons that we take breaks from activities at times. So it's important to keep that in mind with our kids. They don't often know how to reopen their brain, but we can teach strategies and we can do approaches that are going to give them that opportunity to improve how they think, how they remember, and how they function at times where they might have felt that they were under stress. Remember, kids can't always tell us in their words what they're going through. In fact, oftentimes, we'll see behavior before we have an opportunity to talk to a child and have them even understand that there was something that was bothering them. And especially with young children, if you've got children, kindergarten through maybe third grade, they may not always be able to say, wow, I'm confused, or wow, I'm upset about this, I don't know what to do. They'll just react and you'll see behavior. If we think about knowing the difference in their behavior, how do we know if they're refusing or avoiding? Well, obviously, this is just a play on words here. Certainly, avoiding can be refusal, right? You can avoid it for the purpose of refusing to do a task. But more about, can the child actually do the task in the moment versus are they being naughty? Are they opposing us? Are they telling us no because they just flat out don't want to do it? Obviously, as a parent, you probably realize that these things overlap to a certain degree. But how do you know if your child is responding in a way that is just purely being naughty? I'll give you a preview. It's going to be complicated. We don't always have to know whether or not they're being naughty or refusing versus feeling that they can't because of anxiety. But we have to keep in mind as parents that when we feel our children are refusing, that we're much more likely to be upset and bring out consequences, raise our voice, do things that actually raise the sensation and tension in the room and could make the anxiety worse. So keep those things in mind. Obviously, if your child is sensitive or nervous about academics, especially now that they're not in school, their reactions are going to be automatic. That accordion is going to close and their ability to think and concentrate is going to go down. What would happen if they had a prior difficulty? Your child is not very skilled in math or feels easily confused by math. They're going to anticipate or predict that things are going to be more difficult. And then in turn, the accordion brain closes again. They get more nervous. They get less able to think. So a lot of these things come into play in terms of them feeling unsafe or feeling like they're unable to learn, helps them sort of anticipate. They think what's coming next and they start to get wound up. And some of your kids might start to get wound up even if they see the clock is getting close to the time where you told them they're going to be doing work. That anticipation is about them feeling the fear in advance of some situation. Obviously, for our kids, when they're young, our K-3 students, I would say a lot of our students, even all the way up through high school, struggle with getting started. What's the first thing I do? How do I start this new task? How do I engage in it? So sometimes that how to start stressor will also elevate how much they feel uncomfortable. And that can be a trigger for them to refuse and step away or to misbehave. Obviously, the difference between won't and can't has to be differentiated. Sometimes the child won't do a task because they don't feel that they can do the activity, that they don't have the skill. So if they feel they can't do something, refusal gives them power and control. It may feel better to them in the moment to refuse, as opposed to feeling like, oh my gosh, I'm dumb, I can't do this, feeling sort of down about themselves. So there's some protection in saying won't that comes from the idea that they don't feel that they can do something. So the truth of the statement is we don't always know the difference between refusal and avoidance, whether they can't do it because of some skills gap or they're refusing because of some emotional outcome. But I think it's important that you're considering this when you're dealing with your own children. If you come at them from the angle of, I'm going to assume that they're not doing it because they don't feel they can, you can make a difference in helping them get past that anxiety. Even if it's primarily because they're oppositional with you, giving them strategies could calm their bodies. When we think about trying new strategies and seeing how they respond is the best way to know what your child is going through. Obviously, children who know prior things that they've been taught and have strategies aren't always going to show it to you. Maybe you were working with them the day before and you come in and you're talking about, okay, we're going to get our paper done really quick today. It's really awesome. And they get confused. That anxiety can help them in the moment forget what they learned yesterday. So this is not uncommon with your children. It doesn't mean that there's something wrong with them as a learner. It just means that sensitivity means that they're not always going to show you what they know. And that's really, really difficult. How do we start to change this for our own kids? How do we make that impact? Well, first and foremost, let's think about the physical activities they can do. We're not asking parents ever to do talking therapy with their children. That's not what this is about. But what happens within the brain is that when you're engaged and stuck in some sort of anxious physical state, there are certain things you can do to interrupt that. Certain kinds of physical activity, certain kinds of movement disconnects that automatic response of the brain and starts to calm the brain down by engaging your body in certain activities. Obviously, good physical activity, giving the child the opportunity to run, to play, to be active is really helpful because it doesn't allow them to feel like they're trapped with all this energy. And now that so many of you have been home for so long, if your kids aren't getting out as much as they're used to, that pent-up energy can be problematic because it can fuel their anxiety. So much of what we see is that for people who exercise regularly, they don't react as quickly at times to things that would be stressful. So early day activity levels, movement can be helpful for your kids. Being certain that you try to provide a calm environment. If your environment is really stressful and you're finding that people are yelling and screaming because they're stressed themselves, you can understand that your children are going to absorb that emotion and it's going to be harder for them to self-calm. We want to be able to understand that if we had a stressful morning as a family, that we need to do something physical, something active, and then after that self-care, maybe that'll allow us to have a more predictable way of thinking and doing things that require us to use our brain in a way that requires us to be calm. Finally, practicing skills for movement and care. If your child tends to struggle during seated activities, maybe before you start your seated activities, you can get up and practice doing some jumping jacks, doing some push-ups up against a wall, getting them to do a couple of crunches or sit-ups. Those physical activities before they start the task might get it in their heads that if I'm starting to feel a little stressed or I'm starting to feel a little tight in my muscles, that I can take a break from my activities and do that for 30 seconds or a minute and come back. The more a child practices a skill, the more they can do it automatically, even when they're under stress. But if you don't practice a skill before the child is stressed, it's a very low chance they'll be able to do it in the real moment in their daily lives. Finally, offering them strategies, as I said, when stressed is certainly possible. If they are struggling sitting at that table with you or struggling to engage with a reading task, it's completely okay to take a time out and try to self-calm with them and try to do something physical, always sharing with them, we're going to come back to this. Anytime a child feels anxious and you allow them to escape and they don't come back, that anxiety is going to get stronger and more powerful, and they're much more likely to want to escape from that activity in the future. So keep that in strong mind with your child. Obviously, if we practice in advance, they're much more likely to be able to use the skill. If we think about physical movement, obviously understanding that certain things that they do are more stimulating than others. So for example, when a child's in school, if they were to go to PE, and then we try to bring them back to a seated activity, that's what we call inherent stimulation. That's a high stimulation activity. Lots of loud noises, lots of echoing sounds. If you're bringing your child back from a level of play or really engaging video games, giving them a chance to calm down before they sit and work is going to be really important. What came before is going to be important in what comes next. One of the terms that some of the OTs use is the term heavy work. Heavy work is anything that engages the big muscles in pressure within the joints. So if you think about taking a chair, an ottoman, and pushing it across the room, that's heavy work because it's bringing in those big joints and muscles of the body. Your child can get heavy work activity by moving the vacuum around the floor, pushing a broom, helping make a bed or flip your mattresses if you haven't done that in a period of time, if you have those kind of mattresses. Those physical daily activities can be mixed into their day. And then they're learning self-care and how to care for their home, as well as getting that physical activity that could help calm down their bodies before we start work tasks or tasks that they don't enjoy or prefer. Any of those activities, push, pull, lift, drag, or move objects. When we have children in school, it's not uncommon if we have a child who really has difficulty controlling their body, that we might have them take a heavy box and move it down to the school office and back. For your kids, we've got to think about creative ways to do this. Hey, I'm going to vacuum the floor. Can you help me lift and move this couch or chair over? Kids are usually going to be on board with those simple tasks because they're doable, they're understandable. But we can also be teaching them to care for their body at the same time. Making that part of your daily ritual can be super helpful. Give them time to take breaks when they need it. Give them time to move their bodies. General exercise, and I don't really like the term exercise that much with children. When children play, they tend to be more physical than adults, which is why when we get older, we have to exercise as adults because our play tends to be more passive unless we get out and play sports or run around and move. But more and more we find adults do less of that as they get older. So giving your kid a chance to get out and play. For some kids, might be interested in yoga, learning deep breathing, different stretching and motor activities. And you can get a great deal of yoga classes free online, watching them on your various cable providers on demand, or even getting a videotape or a DVD from your local library. It doesn't matter if they're doing the moves completely correctly. In fact, what I find is when I do them, it's a lot of laughter because I can't move certain ways that the yoga instructor asks us to. So people will laugh because they see my butt up in the air or that I can't touch my toes, and those things are okay. It's about the physical activity that's really helpful for your kids. Movement, exercise, yoga, these are all ways of resetting your daily stress levels and can be incredibly important in helping. What we've seen in the research is especially for kids who have anxiety and ADHD or for kids who are generally nervous, intense exercise reduces the body's reactions to stress. It brings a calming response. It fires off positive chemicals. So these are really important things to give some thought to when you're doing movement with your kids. Finally, the last thing we talk a little bit about is relaxation. Relaxation can be anything from practicing simple deep breathing. There are tons of different apps and online opportunities, or just sitting there and taking deep breaths and counting to 5 when you breathe in and counting to 5 when you breathe out. Deep breathing activities are interrupting your body's stress response. So just by slowing down how you breathe intentionally can have a positive impact on anxiety for your children. One of the terms we often use when I work with kids on relaxation is the term mindfulness. Now I'll give a really super brief idea of mindfulness. Mindfulness is the idea that we are aware of how we are feeling or what's going on around us. But being mindful means we just let it be. We just let it exist. So when you're sitting outside and you look at a cloud going across the sky, I don't imagine there are many times where you say, wow, I wish that cloud wasn't there, that cloud's ugly, that cloud bothers me. But what happens when you have a thought, I can't do this, or I'm stupid, or I hate doing this work? And then it's a battle in your head. Well, I have to do this work. Well, you can't do this work. That kind of battle energizes the system that is anxious. So allowing children to think about, if I have a thought, try not to fight the thought. If I have a negative thought, an angry thought, just observe it. Okay, I see you think that way. And just don't argue with it. Just let it be. Let that thought exist in its own way. And what happens over time is the less we fight and wrestle with our thinking, the more those thoughts can move through our head like a cloud moving through the sky. It takes tons of practice. If you try to take deep breaths, for example, and relax, you will find that thoughts jump into your head. And then you'll say, oh, I can't do this breathing. This is too hard for me. Instead of that, just say, oh, there's that thought again. And then start your breath again. It really is about not giving those negative things too much attention and taking control of the part of your breathing that you can. The last slide here I want to share is just a brief example on mindful breathing for you. Mindful exercise. The idea is that you want to find a place that is free of distractions. You live in a family home, good luck. Find the best you can. Find the quietest space you can. Finding a way to sit comfortably with your back straight and keeping as many muscles relaxed as you can. You can do this lying down as well. They just often think about doing it seated because for a lot of people it gives them the ability to feel what their belly and what their chest is doing when they breathe. And then we talk about awareness of your breath, just focusing on the breathing. Pay attention to the sensations, the inhale, what happens in your muscles, and what happens when you exhale. Obviously, the mindful side is not judging, arguing, or trying to change your breathing too much. Just be aware that you're trying to breathe more deeply. This is about non-judgmental approach to your own management of your body. And finally, again, notice what comes into your mind, allow it to move through, and return your attention to the breathing without criticizing yourself, without being hard on yourself. So much of what you guys are doing with your kids right now is triggering anxiety for all of us. If your family is struggling and needs help or is unable to navigate their day-to-day, don't hesitate to reach out to your school administrators, your school social worker. So many people are going through things right now. And today's lesson was really about managing our anxiety and trying to navigate how our bodies respond to stress. Thanks for tuning in. I'll see you next time.